Hey, stop scrolling for a second. A woman walked straight through the middle of a Vineyard engagement party. A baby on her hip, pointed at the groom-to-be in front of 80 guests, and said 4 words that stopped the entire event cold. Tell them who I am. He looked her dead in the eye and said he had no idea who she was. He was lying, and in about 90 seconds, everyone in that vineyard was going to know it. I'm not going to tell you how it ends. Not yet. Just stay with me because this one doesn't slow down. Hi everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from today. I love reading where you all are. This is a story about denial. The lies people tell to protect a life they've built on top of something rotten. And what happens when the truth simply refuses to wait for a convenient moment. So settle in, because this one moves fast. Callum Reyes was 40 years old. Owner of Thornfield Vineyards, a sprawling, prestigious estate in Napa Valley that had been in his family for 3 generations before he took it over. Over the past decade, turned it into one of the most recognized names in California wine. He was polished, charismatic, and, according to nearly everyone who knew him socially, exactly the kind of steady, successful man you'd want your daughter to marry. That afternoon, the vineyard was dressed for celebration. White tents strung with lights across the rolling rows of vines. 80 guests in linen and silk, sipping the estate's own reserve, gathered to celebrate Callum's engagement to Sabrina Holt, a woman from a prominent hospitality family who had spent the last 4 months planning an event that looked, by every visible measure, absolutely perfect. It was during the toasts, glasses already raised, that a car pulled up the long gravel drive that guests weren't supposed to use. And a woman got out holding a baby, maybe 8 months old. Against her chest, her name was Marisol Vega. She walked straight through the center of the party, past confused waitstaff and startled guests, until she was standing directly in front of Callum, close enough that the baby's small fist nearly brushed his champagne glass. Tell them who I am, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the sudden, stunned silence of 80 guests who had, seconds earlier, been mid-toast. Callum's face went carefully, deliberately blank. I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. Someone get security. You don't know who I am, Marisol repeated, her voice shaking now. Not from uncertainty, but from something closer to disbelief that he was actually saying it out loud, in front of everyone. We were together for 8 months. This is your daughter. Her name is Alina. I have texts, Callum. I have photos of us at this exact vineyard, in the tasting room. From before Sabrina was even in the picture. Sabrina, standing beside Callum in a pale blue dress, had gone completely rigid. Her champagne glass, trembling slightly in her hand. Callum, she said quietly, what is she talking about? She's talking about nothing, Callum said, too fast, his composure cracking at the edges. I've never seen this woman in my life. 2 security guards were already moving toward Marisol from the edge of the tent. She didn't flinch, didn't step back. Instead, she reached into the diaper bag slung over her shoulder with her free hand, and pulled out a folded stack of papers, holding them up over her head where the whole crowd could see them. Before you drag me out of here, she said, loud enough that her voice carried to the back rows of seated guests. Someone want to explain why his name is on this hospital birth certificate as the father? I filed for a paternity test 3 months ago. This isn't a guess. This is documented. The security guard slowed, uncertain now, glancing toward Callum for direction he clearly wasn't in any position to give. It was Callum's own mother, Delphine, seated in the front row of guests, who stood up first. She had run Thornfield Vineyards for 30 years before handing it to her son, and she was not, by any account, a woman who tolerated being lied to at her own family's events. Callum, she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the tent. Look at me and tell me the truth right now, because I have known you your entire life, and I can already see that you're lying. The silence that followed felt, to everyone standing in it, like it lasted several minutes. It lasted, in reality, about 8 seconds. It was before Sabrina, Callum finally said, quietly, not looking at anyone in particular. It ended before we ever met. I didn't think it mattered anymore. You didn't think a baby mattered anymore. Marisol's voice cracked, more hurt now than angry. I called you when I found out I was pregnant. I called you 4 times. You blocked my number after the second call. Sabrina set her champagne glass down on the nearest table, with a controlled, deliberate motion that somehow felt louder than if she'd thrown it. You told me, she said slowly, that you'd never been serious with anyone before me. You told me that specifically, more than once. Because I asked, Sabrina, I can explain. You can explain how you have an 8-month-old daughter you never mentioned. Standing in front of 200 of my family's closest friends and business contacts, at our engagement party. Sabrina's voice had gone dangerously calm, the particular calm of someone doing rapid, furious math behind her eyes. There's no version of that explanation I want to hear right now. Delphine, still standing, turned to Marisol with an expression considerably softer than the one she'd aimed at her son moments earlier. May I see her? The baby Marisol hesitated, then walked closer, turning Alina slightly so Delphine could see her face properly. Delphine studied the child for a long moment. The shape of her eyes, the particular set of her mouth features that, to anyone who'd spent decades looking at photographs of Callum at that age, were unmistakable. That's Araya's face, Delphine said quietly, more to herself than to the crowd, though everyone close enough heard it anyway. She looked back up at her son. How long have you known? Callum didn't answer immediately, which was, in itself, an answer. How long, Callum? Since she was born, he admitted finally, barely audible. I saw the birth announcement. I knew. A collective, sharp intake of breath moved through the nearest tables of guests. Sabrina, who had gone very still through the last exchange, picked her engagement ring off her own finger, set it carefully on the table beside her abandoned champagne glass, and walked out of the tent without another word. Her mother and 2 bridesmaids hurrying after her. The party didn't formally end so much as it simply dissolved. Guests drifting toward their cars in small, murmuring clusters. Waitstaff quietly beginning to clear untouched plates of food no one had any appetite left for. Delphine, rather than following her son's chaos, walked Marisol and the baby to a quiet table at the edge of the tasting room, away from the remaining onlookers, and sat with her. I'm sorry, Delphine said simply. Whatever he told himself to justify this, there's no version of it that was fair to you, or to her. I didn't come here to destroy his engagement, Marisol said, some of the fight draining out of her voice now that the confrontation itself was over. I came here because I've spent 8 months trying to get him to acknowledge his own daughter through calls and lawyers and certified letters, and nothing worked. I figured if he wouldn't do it privately, he'd have to do it in front of people whose opinion he actually cares about. That's not destroying anything, Delphine said. That's just refusing to let a lie keep being convenient for him. In the weeks that followed, the engagement to Sabrina ended for good, formalized through lawyers, rather than any further conversation between her and Callum. The paternity test Marisol had already filed for came back, unsurprisingly, confirming what Delphine had recognized just from looking at the child's face. Callum, facing pressure from his own mother more than any court, finally began paying child support, and gradually, awkwardly, started building an actual relationship with his daughter, supervised at first, at Marisol's understandable insistence. Then slowly less so as trust, in small increments, began to rebuild. Delphine, for her part, took an active role in Elena's life that had nothing to do with Callum's reluctant involvement. She began visiting regularly, established a trust in the child's name, separate from anything tied to her son's decisions, and told Marisol plainly, during one of those visits, that she intended to be a real grandmother to Elena, regardless of whether her father ever fully stepped up. He's my son, and I love him, Delphine said. But that doesn't mean I'm going to let him pass his mistakes down to a child who didn't ask for any of this. She's a Reyes too. She deserves better than being someone's inconvenient secret. Here's what this story really asks of us. It's tempting to believe that a lie can simply be managed forever, tucked away and never mentioned, as long as no one who matters finds out. But the truth has its own timeline, and it rarely waits for a convenient moment to surface. It tends to arrive exactly when it will do the most damage to the story someone's been carefully protecting. Marisol didn't need Callum's permission to be believed. She only needed a room full of witnesses, and a face that told the whole story before a single document was even unfolded. If this story kept you hooked today, I'd love for you to hit that like button. It truly helps this channel grow. If you haven't already, please subscribe, because we share stories just like this one every single week. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the next one.